It's your host, College Football with Sam, and it has been quite a while. About 2, 3 weeks since my last live show. Just a few things going on in my life, and also a lot of things actually going on with the channel. There are some changes, some radical changes that you guys will see this summer, but I'll save those for mostly surprises. What we're here to do tonight is focus on, of course, college football, the greatest sport in my opinion, and touching on the SEC and the Big Ten. That's what I want to touch on today, with a little bit of flavor in the ACC due to the fact that our guest, JT Sports, who's been on with us several times, his area of expertise is the SEC, the ACC, and formerly the Pac-12, because that's for everyone who used to be an expert on the Pac-12. You're now either an expert on part of the Big Ten or part of the Big 12 or both because of that fracturing of a Power 5 conference. But here we are. How are you doing, JT Sports? And yeah, how are you doing?
Man, I'm doing great, bro. College football is just around the corner. We're less than 90 days away from kickoff. And then we got the new college football game coming out July 19th. Man, this is a fantastic time to be a college football fan.
Yeah, you said July 15th, right?
July 19th.
July 19th. Okay, good. For a minute I thought it was June 15th or something June, and I was panicking a little bit because I need some time to like make sure that I can properly review that game. I want to get it and then even play some dynasties on it and even post it on this channel and talk about it
Oh yeah.
because
What system?
I don't even have an Xbox or PS yet. The system I currently have is a 360, so I'm gonna have to make a choice on what new system to get.
I'm gonna give you a little tidbit. When you go shopping, try to get your Xbox Series X. It's the little small white one. You could get one at the pawn shop, probably for like 200, maybe like $185.
Oh, okay, and it'll work on that.
Yeah, just like an Xbox Series X. It's small. It looks like a white box. You could probably get it for like around 200, maybe less than that.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, I was thinking of that. I was thinking I'd have to pay more to get access to like it, but if I can just, um, yeah, if I can just get that for high hundreds, lower 200s, that's perfect. If I can find something for that, that easy. Press the invest button on that. Just some more ground rules before we dive deep, just because it's been a while, of course. Super chats will be answered immediately. In fact, when I see one, I'm just going to interrupt either what I'm doing or what JT's doing and just read it off, and we'll get back to what we're doing. At the end of the video, we'll try and have a Q&A session, again, like always, about 5-10 minutes. Not too much time, but if you guys stick around for the end, then just pop a question in the chat, and we'll go over it and answer it at the end. What I want to start out with is, well, what do you think about the new college football game? That's not where I was originally going to start out with, but what do you think of it, just from what you've seen?
Well, the graphics looks outstanding, and I think they have done a fantastic job of really capturing the feel of college football. You can definitely tell that they put a lot of passion into this, way more passion than what they put in the Madden. When I saw the opening trailer with the Boise State blue turf looking as realistic as what it does in real life, I was like, oh yeah, you got me sold. They went as far to get, the marching bands, the crowd noises, the crowd chants. So not only is it going to be like playing in the actual college football game, but it's going to have that feel. And it's kind of going to be like you're at the game as well. It's like, let's say you're playing Michigan versus Ohio State. It's actually going to feel like you're in that game. You're going to be able to feel the intensity. If you're on the road as Michigan and Ohio State Stadium, you're going to have a quarterback that maybe may not be able to see like certain receiver logos when they come open, which, is kind of like what a quarterback goes through in real life with the crowd noise. He may get a little bit rattled, may forget, who to go through or who to go to in certain progressions and whatnot. So it's just really good at capturing, the immersion of what it is to be a college football fan, the pageantry, the tradition, that atmosphere, everything that makes college football is incorporated into this game. They got a pretty good dynasty mode. I'm upset with the road to glory because I don't know if you played the old NCAA games. You used to make a road to glory character and you could play in high school. Now they just have it where you can pick to be a 1-star or whatever star, and you just pick the school you want to go to. I don't really like that. They don't got mascot mode. But other than that, I'm pretty excited for this game. As long as you have dynasty mode and depth and I can play it for like nonstop and it has replay value, I'm gonna be happy with the game. I can't wait for it to come out.
Awesome. Yeah, I've played the older NCAA games, but I've never touched Road to Glory. It's always been Dynasty or one-on-ones with friends. What team are you gonna play like immediately?
Man, honestly, I'm thinking about starting me up a Duke Dynasty. I really want to use the new quarterback that they got from Texas. His name is slipping, Malik Murphy. I really want to use him. Yeah, or Colorado, but it's like I kind of want to rebuild the team that's kind of but at the same time, with this being a new game, I don't want to completely struggle and get a school like New Mexico State or somebody like that. So maybe Colorado State. I'm more so leaning Colorado State.
Huh. Cool. I got to be honest, I'm going to be a total homer, and I just do Michigan. I'd see what Michigan is, or maybe I would pick. It'd be Michigan, and then maybe like another smaller school, just like whether it's Washington or whether I don't know. Honestly,
what's great about this year's game is that if you get Michigan, you're actually going to be forced to play like Michigan because the way they have tailored the gameplay, every team has a specific style. And unless you recruit a certain team that can play like a different kind of offense, you got to play towards that style. So when you're using Michigan and you're playing up against Ohio State, you can ground and pound them similar to how they did in real life because of their playing style. It's actually going to feel like you're actually Michigan football in real life and you're coaching that team.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm super excited for that, and I'm just totally gonna be honest. It'll be probably Michigan or some smaller schools. Of course, I'll try, but bigger schools too. I've always loved playing the 90+ overalls just because you can do like so many crazy things with them. Yeah, that's I'm kind of speechless because I've never expected them to come out with a new version of this game, but here we are. Okay, let's get into.
Cried. I almost cried, Sam, when I heard the news it was coming back, man.
Yeah, it was. I got so excited, but you kind of got the feeling that with NIL becoming, with NIL payments becoming legal and deals becoming legal, that now they have an ability to bring it back without lawsuits.
Yeah,
but. Let's get to college football, which right now is full of lawsuits and full of chaos, but it is what it is. Let's talk about some bold predictions of yours that you gave me before the show. Them being, well, let's save one for later. Let's start with you saying Oklahoma is going to have an elite defense. Now, I think that's a crazy bold prediction. I know they got TCU's former defensive tackle is a really good player. I know his first name's Dominic. Is it Dominic Williams?
Yep.
Dominic Williams. Okay, and I know
they paid They paid like $1 million for him.
Oh, okay, and I know they have some good linebackers, but I don't know much about Oklahoma or their defense outside of Dominic Williams, Brent Venables, and the fact that they've built their offensive line essentially from the transfer portal. And they have a really good receiver room that includes Deion Burks, Andrel Anthony, Nick Scorton, and Nick Anderson. But that's really all I know about Oklahoma. So why do you think their defense is going to be elite after the prior 2 seasons? It's been about as bad at times as the Riley defenses have been.
Well, that's the thing. When Brent Venables took over at Oklahoma, he had to rebuild that defense because those defense weren't built to play a Brent Venables style defense. You know, Brent Venables at Clemson, when you think of his defenses, they were physical, they were really fast, aggressive. But Lincoln Riley, since he didn't recruit the kind of players that Brent Venables needed at that time, you know, he kind of was working from scratch. He had to get guys in through recruiting, bring a couple of guys in through the transfer portal. But when you think of what Oklahoma's defense is going into year 3, he has all the pieces to run the kind of defense that we grew accustomed to seeing him have at Clemson for so many years. What has me so excited is the talent that they have in the secondary. They should have one of the best secondaries in the SEC this year. As a matter of fact, they were 3rd in the country in takeaways. They had one safety who was 2nd in the nation in interceptions with 6. He also led the country in pick sixes with 3. And they are super deep in the secondary, Sam. When I tell you they're deep, they're not just 2 deep, they're 3 deep. And a lot of the guys who they have in the secondary were guys that Brent Venables recruited and developed. A bunch of 5, 4-star guys. And they have one of the most experienced secondaries in the country. And the biggest problem with OU's defense has been their inability to get after the quarterback. That's why you go ahead and you get a Dominic Williams in the transfer portal. Now you shore up the interior of that defensive line. You also have 2 of your leading sack producers from last year. That also includes Danny Stutzman, who not only is the best player on their defense, but he was an All-American last year, Sam. And this dude is one of the more underrated defensive players in the country. You talk about a jack-of-all-trades player. Danny Stutzman had over 100 tackles. He was really good in pass coverage. He also did a really good job at getting after the quarterback on blitzes. He had 3 sacks. With the secondary being as good as what it was last year, most of those guys coming back, with that defensive line now being good enough to stop the run and get after the quarterback, there's no reason why this defense should be anything worse than top 5 minimum. And that's really why I'm so high on OU. You see, Lincoln Riley did such a poor job recruiting that side of the football. It wasn't going to be an easy rebuild for, you know, Brent Venables. He was going to have to recruit, have to get his guys in there and develop them. And he's done a really good job. And that's why I have so much confidence that Oklahoma's defense is going to perform at an elite level.
Yeah. Okay. I can buy that with Danny Stutzman coming back. I know that just looking at their depth chart here, I was looking at that while you were informing me about this. They return Billy Bowman. They bring back Woody Washington. They have what seems to be a lot of I mean, I know Peyton Bowen, for example, pardon me, who was a true freshman last year, going to be a true sophomore this year. He's staying. He was nearly a 5-star when they recruited him. It does look like they return a decent amount on defense. I just look at their numbers, what you said with their struggles to get to the quarterback. Only 24 sacks last year, and then the prior year they had only 28, and they had 20 interceptions this year, 17 last year. So there does seem to be that part where they're superior on the perimeter and in the backfield defensively compared to the lines of scrimmage. I guess a concern from my end would be, do some of the positive changes or positive returning production that Oklahoma has, how is that going to match up against better offenses in the SEC?
When you have a defensive mind on the level of Brent Venables, who has tons of experience going against great teams. He's been in a lot of big games. I don't really think the adjustment from him going against Big 12 offenses to the SEC offense is going to be that big of a change for him. And with how good the secondary is, it's like, and how deep they are, most of these guys are 5 and 4 stars. It's not like he brought in 2 and 3 star guys. So these are the top of the line athletes. These are most of these guys, a lot of SEC schools were after Sam. So for Oklahoma making the transition to the SEC defensively is the large reason why I believe that they can at least be an 8-win team this year. I don't see them becoming the Vanderbilt of the SEC. I don't see them being a stepping stool for anybody like that. And people forget that, they beat Texas last year. Texas already is a SEC school with the way they recruit and the way they bring in guys from the transfer portal. So if you can beat Texas, you can pretty much compete with the majority of teams that you have on your schedule this year. And there's not a single team that I don't think Oklahoma has a chance at being able to beat outside of, I believe they do play Georgia this year, if I'm not mistaken.
Let me.
No, they actually don't play Georgia. So they have the luxury of being able to play Alabama at home. You go on the road and you play LSU, which LSU has a good offense, but their defense is a huge concern also. So for Oklahoma, you got to feel really good about their chances of being able to produce at a high level defensively. And a lot of teams in the SEC last year weren't really that good defensively anyway, like LSU, Ole Miss. So I'm really confident that Brent Venables is really going to have that defense playing at a really high level in 2024 this year. I don't expect that defense to just allow like over 30 points a game just because they're going to the toughest conference in college football. I really think that this is going to be a really great defense. Some people may say it's a little bit overly optimistic, but I don't believe so. With them returning 7 starters, you got so much experience and depth in the back end. You got a lot of 5 and 4 star guys there. As long as that defensive line improves, which it should, with the experience they have coming in, getting Dominic Williams out of the transfer portal, I'm expecting that defense to be one of the best in the SEC this year.
By the way, everyone, just for those of you listening, Oklahoma is 3rd in returning defensive production. Now that is something that I did not know before this, but that's insane. That's like that's the level like that Michigan, for example, returned on like both sides of the ball last year. Like they were top 15, if not, from what I remember, top 10 on like both offense and defense in returning production. And I know for sure that Kansas and Florida State were as well. When you're that extreme in returning production, you typically see some kind of improvement. Typically the extremes, if you return a lot, you see an increase. If you don't return a lot, you return like less than half. You see that side of the ball or that whole team even take a step back. Oklahoma is the only reason they're not higher than 54th in returning production overall is they only return 44% of their offensive production. But you're talking about defense. And like what you said, although this is more so in relation to comparing SEC defenses to Oklahoma's, the SEC outside of, I would say, really Alabama didn't produce a defense that was, I'd say, near elite in both run and pass defense. I mean, Georgia was elite in pass defense, but I would say no better than good or great in stopping the run. And Alabama was probably like top 15 or top 10 in both, just from level of play and total talent they had, which, yeah, I don't know what's happened exactly to the SEC. The SEC seems like it's becoming much more offense and offensively driven, and they're moving away from defense. And I feel like you even see this encapsulated in their best team and best program, Georgia. Georgia right now is stronger offensively than they are defensively for the first time in the whole Kirby Smart era. It's pretty crazy to think about, but yeah.
But the reasoning for that is because the SEC has pivoted so much, because the SEC used to be so old school. It was kind of like what the Big Ten is right now. Smash mouth football, a lot of defensive minded coaches. Now you got a lot of offensive minded coaches in there. Outside of Kirby Smart and Brent Venables, you got Lane Kiffin, you got Josh Heupel, even Billy Napier. He's an offensive minded
Kalen
coach.
DeBoer.
Brian Kelly is more. Exactly. Kalen DeBoer, Brian Kelly's known for his offensive prowess. So when you have so many great offensive minds, and also the majority of the best quarterbacks this year are going to be in this conference
Oh,
also.
easily.
So that's why you've started to see like the SEC pivot a little bit more towards offense. Plus, they started to adapt what the majority of college football was doing, because I always felt like the SEC kind of was a little bit stubborn to adjust to what the rest of college football was doing, because they're like, bro, we're the damn SEC. We don't need to adapt Big 12 offenses. We don't need to be going 3-4 wide. We're going to go, 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, old school smash mouth football, which is what you saw Alabama revert back to last year, because that's kind of how Georgia won the national championship with Stetson Bennett. However, the way Georgia won their natties with Todd Monken calling the plays was that they were a little bit more creative. Like, they mixed in 12 personnel, but also they incorporated spread concepts. And that's why Todd Monken did such a great job with the Baltimore Ravens this past season.
Interesting. Yeah. I wonder how that switch to more of an offensive conference will affect the SEC, because I know that, and by more offensive, it's not just more offensive. It's more like, I don't know. I'm getting outside of my comfort zone, so I'm going to stop myself there. But definitely more offensive rather than defensive. I'm outside of Georgia and maybe Alabama. I think Alabama, just period, this year's being very underrated. Outside of those teams, I do have a hard time seeing any other SEC defense like come through. But you may have convinced me that Oklahoma's defense, there's something to pay attention to there. Where do you think they finish out of
If
all?
Tennessee,
I know
if
they have a great
Tennessee has a
defensive end coming
secondary this
back.
year, yeah, like if they end up having a good secondary this year, they could definitely be up there, because they were one of the more physical teams in that conference last year. You saw them beat Iowa in that bowl game. Like, if they can have a decent secondary, they could be up there also.
Okay, interesting. I'm more inclined to believe your opinion about Oklahoma than Tennessee. Tennessee's defense, I kind of felt like, was a paper tiger last year, and the Iowa win, it's Iowa with Deacon Hill. Like, and anyone who is balanced can beat them. I mean, I think even USC with no defense and Alex Grinch probably beats that team, because at least that defense can occasionally like get a turnover. Iowa's offense just couldn't do anything last year. I'm so happy that Brian Ferentz is gone. But where do you think Oklahoma's defense places out of all the SEC teams? I think I heard you say top 5 nationally. Do you think that any SEC defense will be better than theirs?
Georgia, that's really it. Texas A&M definitely could be up there, because even though they got a new coaching staff, you got Mike Elko there, they still have a lot of talent that
I
still
believe it.
stayed in place that didn't transfer out. But a lot of the teams in the SEC, Sam, are kind of in rebuild mode. You feel me? At least in terms of like trying to revamp their defense. Like, Ole Miss went really heavy in the portal. So when it comes to comfortability, I really like Oklahoma's defense. Texas could be up there because their defense was really good last year. They brought in a couple of really big names in the transfer portal. But I'm really confident that Oklahoma is probably going to have one of the best defenses in this conference this year.
Okay. All right. I'll have to do more digging before I give a rating on that. Before you told me about all this, and then I just did a little bit of digging myself here quickly, I would have been inclined to say that's like a 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5 on the bold prediction scale, because I mean, whether it's because of their tempo offense, which doesn't allow their defense to rest, or just their defense looking kind of like a Lincoln Riley defense the past 2 seasons, it just hasn't been good. The offense has clearly been the stronger side of the ball. But with them being top 5 in returning production. They're bringing back an All-American linebacker. They're bringing in a defensive tackle who probably plays more like an SEC or Big Ten defensive tackle rather than a Big 12 one. And their secondary's deep, and they return starters there too. I think I'm going to do some more digging, and that might change my entire opinion in Oklahoma. Before we move on to your next bold prediction, can you give us maybe a little glimpse of what you think the offense will be, just very briefly?
It's really hard to tell because they do have a lot of talent at their skill position. They got Gavin Sawchuk, who's going to have a breakout season. Like, this dude was an absolute monster. He was on the tear like the last month of December. Like, I was watching the Alamo Bowl and I had money on Arizona winning, and I got a little bit nervous. I was telling my homie, like, man, I hope they don't give it to Gavin Sawchuk again because he might end up carrying these boys to the win. But they got a new offensive coordinator because Jeff Levy's at Mississippi State. So really it's going to depend on how well him and Jackson Arnold mesh together. Now, Jackson Arnold is really going to be the key to determining how successful Oklahoma is offensively in this season, because we know in the SEC, you got to have more than just a great defense to win in this conference. You got to be balanced. And Oklahoma has the potential to be balanced in both the offensive and defensive areas if Jackson Arnold lives up to the hype, because he was part of last year's recruiting cycle. He was one of the highest rated quarterbacks. He was Gatorade Player of the Year. And his debut when he started against Arizona was up and down. He started out a little bit slow, but then in the second and third quarters, he was on fire. But then the fourth quarter, he got cold again.
Gave the game
so we
away.
still don't really, yeah. So we really don't. I don't expect him to be bad. You feel me? I definitely think that he's going to be decent. He could be a lot similar to what we saw out of Jackson Dart last year, and he does have a lot of mobility. So if he ends up reaching his potential and he plays up to expectation, don't be surprised if you see Oklahoma playing in Atlanta. That's their ceiling. You know, like, they're good enough to definitely be able to compete SEC championship because they don't lack talent. You know, when you look at 247's overall talent metric, they're 12th. And last year they were like top 10 in team talent composite ranking. So it's not like they're lacking in talent. They have a good enough team to be able to win the SEC. And that's a big misconception that people have about Oklahoma, and that kind of, you know, irks me a little bit. They make it seem like they haven't recruited at a great level. They haven't brought in top 10 recruiting classes. And when you look at coaching staffs that have done a really good job at developing recruits, I really don't think that it gets any better than Oklahoma. Look at the amount of freshmen that they played last year that were really good. Gavin Sawchuk. They had a really good freshman in the defensive back, in the defensive backfield. So it's like, exactly. So you have a great coaching staff when it comes to developing talent. And just with what they have coming back this year, I only expect them to get better. So if Jackson Arnold plays well, I could definitely see them making it to the SEC championship game. But realistically, I think this probably will be an above average offense. I think they're going to have their growing pains, but I don't think they're going to be terrible, though. I think they'll be about above average. It really just depends on how Jackson Arnold plays, and I still don't really know what to think about him.
Yeah, no, that I think that's totally reasonable, and I feel like I have a more informed opinion about their offense just watching Arnold and then their receiver core, also watching Deion Burks, who came in from the Big Ten. And yeah, Sawchuk is he's a monster. He led them in rushing last year. Looking at their schedule, I think the first 5 games are going to tell a lot, because while none of these teams Oklahoma should lose to based off of their talent, expectations, and what they have returning. I mean, they return more than Tennessee and Auburn, who are part of their first 5-game slate, and the 3 games before that are outside of the SEC. So they're not going to be nearly as tough, obviously. Temple, Houston, Tulane, Tennessee, and then at Auburn. I think that, like, just, I mean, maybe none of those even could be tests, but I feel like Tennessee and at Auburn, and then even Houston with
Hmm.
Willie Fritz and Tulane with some of the talent they've got in the portal. If this team's as bad as some people will think, and part of me is almost inclined to say that they will severely regress, you'll know in those 4 games. But if they're good, like you say, like at least last year good, they'll probably win all 5 of those games. If they're even better than that, especially on the defensive side, I think it'll be hard to know until they play probably their final 5 games or even final 4, like at least final 4 SEC games at Ole Miss, at Mizzou, hosting Alabama, and then at LSU. All of those teams should have really good offenses. And some could say Texas too, but that's a rivalry game. Anything can happen. And Texas does have a lot of changes on offense, just at the skill positions, whereas Oklahoma's in the trenches.
The
Um,
biggest question is going to be that offensive line. You know, it is a revamped offensive line, but a lot of the teams they played this year, you know, you got concerns about their defense. You know, Tennessee, they normally aren't really that good defensively. That's going to be a test just because you got one of the better defensive lines in all of college football in Tennessee going up against, you know, offensive line that you don't know how it's going to play out this season. Auburn, they're playing a bunch of young guys, but it is a tough game because you got to go on the road. Jordan Hare, for a guy like Jackson Arnold, it's going to be tough playing in an environment like that. And then after that Auburn game, I mean, you got Texas, but that's a rivalry game. But after that, like, there's nobody on the schedule that you look at and you're like, yeah, they're going to have a top defense. Like, even Ole Miss, what they did this offseason, they pretty much said, we're going to go all in on defense. So they got most of the top guys out of the portal on that side of the football, but they have Pete Golding as their defensive coordinator. So it's just like, even with LSU, like LSU has an all-star defensive staff and they have to play them on the road, but they're lacking talent on the interior of their defensive line. Now, it's not like they don't have talent at all, but they don't have a lot of it. And they also are lacking depth there. And they didn't really get the guys that they wanted in the portal at all. Like Dominic Williams, LSU wanted him. I don't know if
yes.
you saw Brian Kelly's comments about how he ain't going to pay for players. It was a bunch of BS to me because, let's be honest, Sam, everybody's buying players. The problem with Brian Kelly just is that I guess he didn't have enough to get Dominic Williams. Oklahoma did. So Oklahoma, you know, with the fact that they're going to be pretty good defensively, offensively, you don't know what to think about Jackson Arnold, but nobody you're really going up against right now has a great defense on paper. Even Mizzou, like, they lost their defensive coordinator, Blake Baker, to LSU, and they also lose a lot of production from that side of the football. They're going to be more of an offensive-centric team this year.
Yeah. Yeah. The SEC has a lot of questions on the defensive side of the ball. And I'd say a lot of the country has questions at defensive tackle. This will probably be a down year for interior defensive lines. Yeah. Okay, this next bold prediction that you have is something that I vehemently disagree with, but I want to hear your angle before we get into it. Okay. Michigan will be a non-factor in the Big Ten race, which I assume also means they're gonna miss the college football playoff. Why do you think that is? Is it the angle that I think, which is mainly returning production based, new staff, or is it much deeper than that?
Really, that is just that you had such a great run. You ran through the Big Ten so much this year, in the last 3 years. With you losing Jim Harbaugh's the greatest coach you guys ever had. That's fair to say, right? You guys probably are going to get a statue of this dude built. No matter what comes up of the NCAA investigations, you can never take away a championship.
Nope.
You feel me? I really don't play too much into the whole sign stealing things because everybody's doing it. You just got caught doing it. So you feel me? Y'all deserve that championship. You feel me? Regardless what happens. It's just that now you got Sharon Moore taking over. You bring in Wheat Martindale. You feel me? He's an NFL guy, runs an NFL style defense. That defense should still be really good, but you lose so much, man. You only have one returning starter on offense. You only return more on defense. Now, you guys have recruited well. And looking at your schedule, though, you got to play Oregon. I definitely feel that's going to be a loss for you. And you got to go on the road and play Ohio State this year. I definitely think that Ohio State can, tilt that rivalry back in their favor with Jim Harbaugh being gone. And I think that you guys probably end up losing to Texas and maybe slipping up to somebody else. I don't think you guys are going to be garbage or terrible. I just think that it is fair to expect, after 3 years of dominance and pulverization, for you guys to kind of come back a little bit down to reality and rebuild. Because you see, you guys do recruit decently, but you guys are more so of a program that, you develop. You put more prioritization on developing talent. And with you not consistently bringing in elite recruiting classes like a Georgia or a Texas, and you're not really that active in the portal. If you guys go to the portal, you may get a receiver or two, but most of the time you're getting an offensive or defensive lineman. So for Michigan, I could see them as a 9-win team. I don't think they're going to be terrible. I just think that Oregon and Ohio State right now are just so much better than you, especially with Ohio State. Let's just be honest, Sam. Like, Ohio State paid for their team. And I know what people are going to say. Oh, it doesn't matter if you pay for your team. They're going to bring up Texas A&M. But we got to stop making it seem like Ryan Day is a terrible head coach. Like, this dude has doesn't even have 10 losses on his resume. You feel me? The only problem is that he just can't get past Michigan, but Jim Harbaugh's gone now. And there was a time when Jim Harbaugh struggled to get past Ohio State.
Yeah.
You feel me? So with how talented and how stacked Oregon and Ohio State are this year, and you got to play Texas. Like, I get you're playing Texas at home, but Texas is the same team that went on the road and beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa, a place that they've only lost 4 times in the past decade, and they still return 7 starters on that offense. So I'm looking at Michigan, and I think that they just have 3-4 losses, and that's what keeps them out of the Big Ten picture. I think now Oregon, Ohio State probably should roll through their schedules. Unless Oregon and Ohio State have to play again this year, then that could be something different. So I'm not saying that you're going to completely be irrelevant, but I really think that the Big Ten comes down to Oregon and Ohio State this year.
Yeah, I vehemently disagree with that, but it's not unfair because of all the change at staff, on the roster, and especially at certain points on the roster like receiver and quarterback that haven't exactly been recruited to the degree that they could have been or developed to the degree that they could have been. Those are some big areas with humongous questions. I mean, I don't even know if Michigan has a receiver who will have consistency. I don't know if the quarterback.
How you feel about the quarterback?
Consistency.
Alex Orji, like.
I have more confidence
how did you feel
in
about
quarterback than I do wide receiver, actually.
How do you feel about Alex Orji potentially being a starter and his ability to throw the football? Because I see that being a big question mark that people have about him.
It is a massive question mark. I don't think he'll be a John O'Korn, Brandon Peters level bad. I don't think he'll be Joe Milton level bad. But that's such a low bar. And I mean, at that point, you're relying on other defenses for you to win games, like for them to not be super good or not all be top 5 in the Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State games, rather than relying on your quarterback to beat those defenses. Like last year, it didn't matter how good Ohio State's defense was because J.J. McCarthy made a ton of NFL throws in that game that are so hard to guard. Orji doing that, it's like he has the athletic skill set theoretically to be like a Lamar Jackson, but I'm not going to predict that to happen because that would just be insane. Like the odds of that happening are closer to 0% than 5%, or maybe even closer to 0 than 1. But I personally am confident about everything except for quarterback and wide receiver. What the problem with that is that leaves a lot of things out of your control, because that means the passing offense is severely limited. I think the rushing offense will be elite. I think the defense will be elite, but if Texas's secondary's top 50 and their D-line doesn't take as much of a step back as I think it does, that could put Michigan in an area with trouble. And I think Oregon and Ohio State have the combination of offense and defense to where those will be very, very hard games, even if Michigan positively answers some of their questions at quarterback and receiver. And their schedule is, like you've already talked about, and I've kind of been talking about it too, their schedule is tough. The only reason I don't think it's fair to say that Michigan will be a non-factor is mainly the development angle and the Jim Harbaugh being such a great coach and having such a great staff, especially at strength and conditioning, that even if Sharon Moore is not the guy, and even if this staff isn't good, that the system is in place for there to be at least a few more good years before the whole thing just falls apart. If Sharon Moore isn't the guy. And I think he is, but we don't know. At this point, Michigan is one of those programs that has a ton of unknowns, especially about its distant future. What was I was thinking about asking you something. What do you think about those rooms? And perhaps more importantly, what do you think about their trench play?
When it comes to Michigan,
Yes, because trench play is ultimately what wins the Big Ten. I mean, the Big Ten's probably the most trench-centric conference in the entire college football universe.
well, it's just like my thing is you guys have always been really good up front for the past 3 years. You guys have put a bunch of NFL guys into the league. But my thing is, if you're going to have the same concern about Texas with what they lose up front, I feel like it's only right to have that same, concern about Michigan because Texas, like they just paid for one of the best defensive tackles in the nation in the portal. You feel me? So it's like with Texas, anytime they got a hole, their pocket's so deep, they can go get anybody they want to that's top of that position. When it comes to Michigan, though, you don't always take that same approach. And I just feel like, like with Texas, they're one of those teams that they just reload. They don't really rebuild. With Michigan, you're going to have to develop these guys. And you guys have lost some really good interior defensive linemen over the last couple of years. Same thing with your offensive line. It's like you guys have had a Joe Moore Award finalist offensive line for the past 3-4 years in a row. So for you to be able to sustain this level of consistency, you might as well consider yourself to be the next Georgia. You feel me? Because really only Georgia is the kind of program that's a damn football factory when it comes to putting out these damn metahumans on the interior of the offensive and defensive line. So it's just like, I expect a slight drop off. You really concerns me about Michigan as quarterback and wide receiver because, like, I don't think you're going to be able to Penn State your way to wins this season. Like I'll be really surprised if you beat USC running the football like 31 straight times. Like USC, they're going to force you to have to put that ball in the air eventually. And with Alex Orji, it's like, I think if you can get Anthony Richardson, you could be decent. But JJ McCarthy, as much as I nagged on him, like, dude was consistent. He made big time throws in the biggest moments. I don't know if you can get that same thing out of Alex Orji. And even with him, you're probably still going to be running heavy because you probably could use him on a lot of design quarterback runs, quarterback power, read options, audio. So maybe the playbook does change a little bit with him at quarterback than what it was with JJ McCarthy. But I just think with, the kind of personnel you have right now, you're just going to be so reliant on the run. And that's really what's going to hurt you because last year you were able to be balanced, even though we knew you were going to run the football. But the thing is, you could still mix in the pass with that. I don't know if you're going to be able to sustain that same style of play, especially if you're going to play Oregon. Like Dan Lanning, he comes from that Kirby Smart tree. He's put a lot of emphasis on improving that defense. That defensive line is nasty. They got Walter Nolan out of the transfer portal too. Like, it's just going to be a little tough sledding for Michigan to win the same way they did in 2023 this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that Michigan's path to victory is actually a lot like the 2021 season, which had its ceiling, but I think Michigan is going to need to rely even more on that offensive line, which, while not as questionable as quarterback and receiver because of all they lost, has its questions. But I am going to push back on part of the discourse about the trench play because Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant come back, and they're projected to be first rounders. And Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart come back at end. Now, from what I remember, Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart both had like 5.5 sacks each. And Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant did have they had some similar numbers as well in regards to all of that. I'm just pulling this up right here. Yeah, Michigan in total had 40 sacks, and their leaders in sacks were Josiah Stewart at second with 5.5, Derek Moore with 5, Kenneth Grant at 3.5, Mason Graham at 3. And they lose a lot there. And they also bring back Will Johnson, Quentin Johnson, and Makari Page. Like, they have players on defense, and they have depth on defense. And Michigan, they even returned some rotational players on offense who played big roles. So I understand where you're coming from, and I do think Michigan's floor this year is like 9-3. Probably all of those losses: Texas, Oregon, Ohio State. Only reason I don't have it at 8-4 is I think this team is good enough in the trenches combined and on defense to where if they do lose a random game, they'll upset a good team. But I'd say that's my major pushback. But more so with other fans who think that Michigan has like nothing after they won and most of their starters lost, is this team's deep. And last year's team had the depth of like a 2021, 2022 Georgia. And last year's Georgia was not as good as those Georgias. They weren't. But they were still a near elite team. They had the potential to be a powerhouse. And I think that Michigan is probably going to be closer to that, and they take that step back. But they're still a force to be reckoned with, as opposed to losing all of their big games, especially two of them that are at home against teams in Oregon and Texas who don't yet have the reputation that Michigan does on defense and in the trenches.
But here's the thing with that, though. They got way more proven quarterback play than what you're going to have. And you're not going to be able to beat Oregon or Texas by just relying on all defense, because those teams are going to get theirs. You have Steve Sarkisian, one of the best offensive minds in the game, and then Oregon has one of the top OCs who most likely could be a head coach next year, and Will Stein. So it's just that, the quarterback position really is what has me leaning towards Michigan kind of falling off a little bit, because at least with Georgia, you went from Stetson Bennett to Carson Beck.
That's
you feel
true.
me? And Carson Beck was a 4-star recruit. Now, Alex Orji was a 4-star recruit too. He was highly sought after. It's just that we haven't seen him really show us what he can do throwing the football. With Carson Beck, what I saw out of him in the spring game, plus actually playing against him in high school, like we actually went up against Carson Beck. So I seen it with my own eyes. Like, this dude was special. Yeah, like we won, but he terrorized us. So it's like with Georgia, they just recruit so well overall. You just know they're going to be great year in and year out. With Michigan, it's like, yeah, you have some really good guys in the trenches, but you still have to have that good quarterback play. If you would have had J.J. McCarthy coming back this year, I probably would have you up there winning the Big Ten again. It's just that quarterback play is so important, and Alex Orji, if he could be Stetson Bennett, that might be good enough. But it's like Oregon and Ohio State are so talented this year that you're going to need that good quarterback play. Hell, like Ohio State lost to you guys last year due to mediocre quarterback. I wouldn't call it mediocre, but Honda McCord, that's why I like to call him Honda McCord. Like, he was above average. He got them to win against Notre Dame, but in the big moments against Michigan, he couldn't get it done.
Yeah.
Now you got Will Howard, and I think that is going to be the difference in Michigan. kind of falling off a little bit. But I definitely could see them, getting up there. Like you are right. They do have a couple of NFL guys still. They do have good depth. You guys always have recruited well when it came to the trenches and the interior. It's just that, you got Oregon coming in. You got Ohio State with Chip Kelly now calling the plays. It's just that you're going to have to be able to win with way more better quarterback play than what you have done in the past. And even if J.J. McCarthy came back, I felt like a little bit more would have been placed on his shoulders this year.
Oh, absolutely.
Even though you do have Donovan Edwards.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had this conversation with myself because I'll sometimes do that. Like I'll just talk out loud, like about things. And I came to the conclusion, like this week, that if Michigan returned J.J. McCarthy, they'd be like my unanimous number 2. I'd have Georgia like clearly ahead of them because I think Georgia this year is kind of in their own tier. And Bill Connolly's S&P Plus actually backs that up. So that kind of was comforting to me. It's like, oh, I'm not the only one thinking of this. But they don't return J.J. McCarthy. They bring in Alex Orji, who's probably a better runner. So if Michigan's O-line is elite again, I have a hard time seeing anyone stopping their run game, but he's a total question mark in the air. And so are the receivers. And particularly against Ohio State, Oregon and Texas, I've watched their secondaries, and they can be beaten. Ohio State's, they'll come forward with like 7 or 8 guys and only have 4 or 3 of them in coverage at times, and they're still on their men. That's an NFL secondary right there. And their D-line returns enough, and their linebackers are good enough. And to go back to their D-line, especially defensive tackle, they're great enough to where you're going to have to either completely shut down their offense or have a near elite to elite offense yourself to score points on them. Out of all of the games that we're really talking about in particular, I think that Oregon and Ohio State probably scare me the most. Texas almost scares me more, but that's just because I don't want to lose in week 2 at home. In terms of like matchup and talent, Oregon and Texas are like the really, I'd say, intimidating teams.
Yeah, like Oregon, that defense is going to be as good as it's ever been. Dan Lanning's a defensive-minded coach. He comes from that Kirby Smart coaching tree. Like, I just can't. Same thing with Brent Venables. He's going into his 3rd season. He has similar problems, that Brent Venables kind of inherited. They put a lot into that defense the last 2 years. I'll be really surprised defense isn't at least top 50 this year. Not ruling out completely. It just really depends on quarterback play. Like, I ain't really too much tripping on the receivers because I just win with, and I got respect for that. You feel me? It's just that the quarterback play definitely does have to be at least decent. And Alex Orji's one of those guys that he could be one of them that they struggle to complete, 55, 60% of his passes in the game. Because he kind of does have that Anthony Richardson label to him, so he could be a little bit sporadic, and he could have some costly turnovers. One thing about J.J. McCarthy, as much as people are harped on him for being a game manager, he never lost you games. You feel me? Now, you may have won in spite of him at times, but he never really cost you games.
No.
With Alex Orji, he could have some costly turnovers that maybe cost you games. Like the worst game I ever seen out of J.J. McCarthy in terms of taking care of the football was Maryland.
Yeah. And then before that in 2022, it was
TCU.
Yeah. Oh, that game was so terrible, especially with how bad Michigan played. Part of me feels like if they did survive that game, that they may have like beaten Georgia, because I feel like if you prepare for a playoff team that badly, you're totally looking ahead to like the other playoff game, which was a big mistake because Georgia was just objectively better anyway, and TCU was good. The only team that was the only team that had no chance really of losing to TCU was Georgia, based off of like matchups and different things. Yeah.
Now can I get something off my chest also?
Yeah.
Because this I kind of been holding this in for a while. And this is a little bit off topic, so you can cut this up into its own different thing. Like, I don't think the SEC is Georgia and everybody else. Like, I really think that the SEC is as wide open as it's ever been this year because Georgia's schedule is one of the toughest is college. It's one of the toughest in college football. Also, like they got to go on the road, and their three biggest games and play Alabama and Tuscaloosa, Texas on the road, and Ole Miss on the road. And Ole Miss has a squad this year, and a lot of people view Ole Miss as a top 5, top 6 team going into this season. And when you have 3 tough road games, I think it's fair to at least see them dropping 2 of them, which definitely could open the path for them maybe falling out of favor in the SEC title picture, because there definitely could be a one-loss team that gets in over them. So I'm not saying that, Georgia can't win it all. I'm just saying that I don't think they're as big as a lock to win the SEC as what a lot of people think, because what a lot of people seem to be overlooking is the fact that with these new super conferences pretty much, and you have so much conference realignment going on, these conferences are going to eat on each other, if that makes sense. Like it's really going to be hard to look at the Big Ten and just say, oh, yeah, like Ohio State and Oregon are just outright going to win that thing. You feel me? Because those conferences have so many great teams in them that we're going to get a lot of these big time matchups this year. So it's hard to see Georgia going undefeated this year when, prior, you probably will look at their schedule and say, oh, yeah, they could. But it's like, you're going on the road to play Alabama with Kalen DeBoer, who's 10-1 against top 25 teams, on the road against Texas, on the road against Ole Miss. Like, even Georgia fans will probably tell you, like, yeah, it's fair to expect them to drop one game. And, anybody who says elsewise is a little bit unrealistic in a sense. Not saying that they're not capable of that, but, this is a good Georgia team, but it's not an all-time great Georgia team like we saw in 2021, 2022. They return a lot on offense, but, like with how tough this conference is with conference realignment, I don't think we're going to see too many teams in the future, go undefeated anymore. So that's why I say, like, Georgia could win the national championship, but may not make it to the SEC championship game of how tough their schedule is. And plus, like, with them expanding the college football playoffs to 12 teams, even Michigan could get in. If you lose 2 games, three, or you had 3 losses or 2 losses, you could still sneak in because it's 12 teams. So all it did was make it easier for the Blue Bloods to get in, or the dominant programs to get in.
Yeah, 10-2 Michigan with this schedule's getting in, like most likely, unless it's a super weak year in which there's so many 1-loss teams that 2-loss teams have to be cut out. But that's going to be unlikely most of the time.
I think the team that has the best chance to maybe go unbeaten may be Ole Miss, because they have the most favorable schedule out of all the teams in the SEC. Like, it's like their first 5 games, like, you don't even got to watch them. You play in a school called Furman. Like, Sam, do you even know where Furman is on the map?
Furman sounds, I know their schools in the South. That's it. They sound like more of a name. They sound like more of a name for an animal than like a school.
Yeah, it sounds like a kind of a Tiger Cat or something like that. Middle Tennessee
Yes.
State, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern. And then once you get in the conference play, you got Kentucky, you got South Carolina, then you got LSU on the road, then you got Oklahoma at home, then you got Arkansas, Georgia at home, and Florida on the road, and then Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl to close out. So really, if there was a team that had a shot to go undefeated in the SEC, it is Ole Miss. Not because they're a better team than Georgia, because it's not all about talent. It's also about how the schedule lines up. And with you avoiding to have to make so many tough road trips, it favors Ole Miss to go undefeated just because they have a more favorable schedule. But they could have one loss. South Carolina, they got one of the most athletic, freakish teams in the nation. Like, they have a wide receiver that's like 240 pounds and ran a faster 100-yard meter than Tyreek Hill. So it's just like they like the SEC it's gruesome this year. Same thing with the Big Ten. I just think with the Big Ten, I don't think you guys have so many cannibalistic matchups where you got like your best teams going toe to toe. I don't think Oregon and Ohio State played this year, but if they
They
do,
do.
it's just so it's hard to see anybody going undefeated this year. So with how these conferences are structured now, it's just hard just to look at a team and be like, oh yeah, like without a doubt, you're going to win the conference.
Yeah, I get that. Two things.
This is that parity that everybody wanted.
Yeah. More on that in a few seconds. Two things. Chris, it's been several minutes since you gave the super chat. But thank you for the $2 again. No Penn Stating wins for Michigan. I mean, Michigan, honestly, Penn State has been a little bit of a free win for the previous 3 years because, fun fact, James Franklin's never beaten Michigan when they're ranked in the top 10. He's also never beaten Michigan in a full big house. And he's never beaten a top 10 Ohio State team outside of that fluke game where they blocked the field goal. And that Ohio State team was ridiculously inefficient with the talent they had in 2016. A shout out to Urban Meyer. Thank you for the $2, Chris. I appreciate your support on this channel a lot. Number two is I'm actually in some inclined to agree with you about Ole Miss because their schedule is insanely easy. Another team who's like that is Missouri. Missouri's schedule is Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt, bye, at A&M, at UMass, Auburn, at Alabama, bye, Oklahoma, at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, and Arkansas. That at A&M, that's tough. At Alabama's tough, but you have a nice game against UMass, who's essentially an FCS school, in there, and Auburn at home. Auburn has a ton of questions, and Missouri's toward the top of the SEC in returning production. They actually return more than Ole Miss and have a really good portal class. Missouri, if you watched my top 25, I have them at sixth. I might actually raise them. Like, they might climb up more when I release another one in a few weeks upon doing more research. I love Missouri. I think Drinkwitz is a top 15 coach. He total nerd, total schemer. I really like what Mizzou's done.
My thing with Eli Drinkwitz is that I need to see you do it again this year, because basically I'm going off one season with you, and it kind of was a season where it kind of it came out of nowhere. But once they got that one against Kansas State, you kind of knew this kind of was a season that probably was going to be one for the books.
Yeah, was it really one season though? I know in 2022 they had that losing record, but they've played Georgia tight 2 years now. Like, two elite Georgia teams. Ole Miss got shredded by Georgia. That was a Michigan Penn State 2022 redo. That's what Georgia Ole Miss was. Georgia just snap, hand off, like Kendall Milton goes for 20 yards, rinse and repeat. Missouri was in there in probably one of the most intimidating environments in college football. And if not for if not for Brady Cook throwing like 2 picks, one of which was to a defensive tackle, which I guess has a little bit of luck to it, they could have won. So I mean, I get
with
though.
Mizzou is that they always have had really good defensive lines and a lot of athletic guys on those D lines too. They got a couple of NFL guys too. And that's why they've played Georgia so well. But as you said, like with Brady Cook, he kind of did cost them those games. But yeah, like Mizzou definitely is a great team. It's just that I need to see a little bit more consistency out of them this season, because they did lose to LSU. And, they did give up a lot of points in that game. But, it's the SEC, so I ain't going to harp too hard on them. It's just that I need to see more of them in year 2, because it's kind of like they came out of nowhere. They had a couple of bounces that went their way. So I just need to see it again to believe it. But I would see them as like a top 10 team. I probably would have them more so like in a top 15, just because like what you lose on defense, and you lose one of the best defensive coordinators in the nation too. That's
Yeah.
going to be hard to replace. But he has a pretty good eye for building good coaching staff. So we'll see how this new guy does. But I think Missouri definitely does have a great shot at winning the SEC. Hell, like we could get an SEC championship. We got Ole Miss Mizzou. Wouldn't that be crazy?
That would be what would be hilarious is if that's the SEC title game and then like Georgia, Alabama, or Texas still win it all. And like because of the new scheduling format, people are like divisions might have actually produced better conference championship games because there's something called the schedule. I'd call it the schedule lottery now. Like if you were in the Big Ten West in some years before Kirby Smart came around, it was the SEC East as well. You're guaranteed to get an easy schedule. Now anyone can get an easy schedule. Just depends on the year because they have a whole algorithm for all of that stuff. It depends on the year and a variety of factors. But Ole Miss and Missouri, they could have tough schedules, but they look to have very easy ones based off of what we see.
Or the football gods could be against you, and you get put in a situation like Billy Napier when it's you against the world, and it's mission impossible because, oh my goodness, whew. We got to pray for Billy Napier.
You took me right where I wanted to go because that's what I want to talk about now is as Uncle Lou affectionately calls him, Sunbelt Billy. What do you think of him? And like not even schedule, not even team, just like of him, the head coach.
It's weird because I watched a lot of Louisiana when he was coaching there with Levi Lewis and Elijah Mitchell. And the coach that I saw at Louisiana hasn't really been the coach that I've seen at Florida. At Louisiana, he was a better in-game operator. In late game situations at Florida, he has kind of had some clock management issues. His teams haven't been prepared. He's still trying to get his defensive coordinator hires right. Arson Armstrong goes in a year or two. There was a lot of coverage bust last year, a lot of big plays given up. But he is a great recruiter. This dude has brought in some really good recruiting classes. A lot of those guys have stuck through. He brought in DJ Lagway. It's going to come down to the coaching this year. It really is going to be on him because this is the SEC. Yes, he does have the toughest schedule in college football, but everybody's playing a tough schedule pretty much in the SEC. Even if you are a team like Ole Miss that has a favorable schedule, you still have some tough games in there that you got to go win. And for Florida, their team is not as bad as what people think when you look at it on paper. Like they got a really good receiving core. They brought in Elijah Badger, who was one of the best available wide receivers in the late spring portal window. You have Eugene Wilson, who comes back. He was your top receiver behind Ricky Pearsall that you bring back this year. Your offensive line should be pretty decent. And their defense, they should be a lot more improved. They brought in some really talented guys in the secondary that are experienced. You got a safety and Asa Turner. You're going to be putting him next to their free safety, who was a all-SEC freshman selection. So they got a pretty decent squad, a squad that's enough that, like if you play them at home, they definitely could upset you. Like, as a Miami fan, I definitely think that could be a tricky game. Then you got to host Texas A&M, and you do play UCF. So there's a possibility that, going into that Tennessee game, Florida may have 3 wins. It's just for Billy Napier. It's going to come down to his coaching staff and this in-game coaching ability if Florida wants to find a way to get the 6 wins. But I don't even think that if Florida doesn't win 6 games, that necessarily guarantees he's going to get fired. Because, you still do have DJ Lagway. And let's say like Florida loses a couple of these games by 3 points or 1 possession, and you have like a Scott Frost situation. You remember how he bought himself another year at Nebraska because, everybody's like, bro, this is the best one game lost team in America. So if Florida goes down that path And as you mentioned earlier, they get a break with their schedule next year. They could easily get the 8 wins because, not only has he done a good job getting talent in the transfer portal, but he's done a really good job of recruiting. And most of those guys are going to be upperclassmen. You're going to have a lot of experience next year. So all Billy Napier has to do is survive and advance this year. You feel me? And I definitely don't think that Florida, from a talent standpoint, is just going to be a passover. Like they got a solid quarterback in Graham Mertz. Your offensive line is decent. Your defensive line has talent. I got some concerns about linebacker. Outside of that, they got a pretty solid squad. I say they have a top 25 team from a talent standpoint, and I would view them as Nebraska, the SEC. It just comes down to Billy Napier as a coach.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to talk about this, is because I feel like there are parallels, like a lot of them, not necessarily with the Nebraska program period, which has operated at a far worse level than Florida has in the past decade, but just specifically looking at the Scott Frost era. Like you're taking over a program that has been through a string of coaches that weren't terrible, but they did not produce at the Florida standard. Like Jim McElwain and Dan Mullen. They had double-digit win seasons, but they never won the SEC, and they eventually fell apart. And their teams got worse and worse. Now, you have Billy Napier, who's had 2 losing seasons. He went to a bowl game, at least in his first season. But again, this is Florida. This is the SEC. And you had Anthony Richardson that year. And you didn't do much with it outside of beat Utah. Last year, they go 5-7. A few balls don't bounce their way. But 5-7, it is what it is. Do you feel like Billy Napier is like the new Scott Frost? Like, not even just some parallels between them, but like they're so similar. Like, have you even seen them in the same room? Because I know that his game management is questionable. His teams are undisciplined. He recruits well, but Scott Frost recruited well for a Big Ten West school. Like, the most talented or second most talented roster in the West couldn't do anything with it.
And Scott Frost called plays, didn't he?
Yeah. And Scott Frost produced more NFL talent than his predecessor. And he produced, like, I forget who his strength and conditioning coach is, but he had a strength and conditioning coach that was nationally recognized at UCF and that produced, I think, more high-level draft picks on an average basis than even, like, Bo Pelini did. And that's even factoring in, like, Ndamukong Suh. Like, they had talent. And they had some aspects of them that were good. And I look at Graham Mertz or Montrell Johnson, or they've had a good portal class like Elijah Badger or Jason Zandamela. And they've had some defensive additions too. But with their gauntlet of a schedule and with his incompetence, because I think that's what you have to call it at this point, is he the new Scott Frost?
I gotta say yes and no. Like I think he's a little bit better than Scott Frost, but I definitely do understand the comparison. I definitely do think there are a lot of overarching situations. I really just think with Billy Napier, like he got a bad. You look at Billy Napier and you say, yeah, like, you got a big win at home against Tennessee. You also got a pretty big win against South Carolina at the time, which is when they really needed it because that's when their season went off the deep end. And, like if they would have had Graham Mertz, their final game against Florida State, they beat FSU.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't have Graham Mertz that final game, and they had a close loss to Missouri. So they definitely were like, a couple of bounces and, some injuries away from being a 7-win team. It's just that this season, though, like you don't really have any games that you look at that are guaranteed wins outside of Sanford and Mississippi State. And then outside of that, it's just tough sledding from there. But
Yeah.
man, that's a tough question, Sam. It really is. I don't want to think he's the Scott Frost, because I do think that he is a hell of a lot better than Scott Frost. I just think that the SEC is just so tough. Is that a guy like Billy Napier, a middle of the road, average coach, is not going to cut it in this conference. You
Yeah.
know, you're going to need more. You're going to need somebody who's not just a great recruiter, but also somebody who's a great game manager. And his offensive play calling probably is going to be his detriment, because he still isn't giving that thing up.
Oh, he
And Graham
hasn't?
Mertz did play well last year. Yeah, like I believe he's still going to be calling the plays this year,
Oh
bro.
my
So
gosh. He okay. Well, that solidified my opinion. I'm going to make my own video on this perhaps. That solidified my opinion. Is stubborn, in over his head. Oh, and you know who else? Guess who else on the bingo card had a few bounces that didn't go their way and could have had several top 25 wins if things went their way? Frosty the Snowman.
Scott Frost.
That's that's
And
who
it's
else could have
confirmed.
had those things. And I think that this year Florida is going to be that team that has a losing record and probably plays everyone. I'm even going to go as far to say like even LSU at home or Ole Miss at home, maybe even Texas on the road, but I don't know. Outside of Georgia and Texas, they probably play all of those teams within like single digits, but probably lose to most, if not all of them, just because of the talent disparity combined with the game management, but also they have just enough talent to hang around. And they're going to be motivated. I don't think that Billy Napier is like Jimbo Fisher or someone that totally loses the locker room. Like, I don't think Frost necessarily lost the locker room. He just didn't know how to close out a game. Like in 2021, every game they played in, they came with fire, but it just got extinguished at the end, and then it was rinse and repeat.
Yeah, that's how I feel about Billy Napier too. It's like, and he even confirmed. I see it now. He did it in the interview with Josh Pate. Josh Pate asked him about the play call. He said, "Man, I'm still finna be taking control of that thing." And I got to go watch the whole interview, but I know Josh Pate probably had like a smile, probably had like a frown inside. He probably was like, man, because he's been the one who's kind of been the biggest supporter of Billy Napier. And I've kind of been a little bit biased towards Billy Napier too. And it's like, I'm looking at this schedule. I want to find a reason to believe that they could beat the odds this year, because if there's one coach that's good at always beating the odds, it's Shane Beamer down in South Carolina. But it's just like he doesn't have that Shane Beamer quality in him where, like he could pull a rabbit out of the hat. It's just, I like Billy Napier. I really do. I definitely do think he ends up getting another job. But I also could see him staying with Florida another year and actually succeeding. I think with these super conferences now and conference realignment, some of these programs are going to have to be a little bit more patient, because these conferences are so saturated. And I definitely do think that Florida has, recruited so well, especially when you had the number one quarterback prospect from last year's recruiting class on your roster. Like, I definitely would like to see him get at least one more year. I don't think 3 years is enough with the way that the SEC is right now. But at the same time, like, if you're still making the decision to not give up play calling, that definitely isn't something that votes well for you going into your final year, because you don't want to go into a lot of, the biggest thing that I notice is when you have a coach on the hot seat that ends up making a coordinator hire that's due to, them being really nervous about their job. So they just go ahead and, make the hire. Like, for example, Arkansas hired Bobby Petrino and Sam Pittman's on the hot seat. Him and Billy Napier have the hottest seats in America. And I don't really see that playing out well. So anytime you make like a hire like that out of nervousness and you do it because of job security, it just never really votes well, because you're basically banking on this one coordinator to save your job. So I think for Billy Napier, like I really don't know if he gets fired after this season per se. I could see him getting another year unless this is like a 3-win season. But if he can get the 5 wins and they're competitive, I could see him sticking around for at least one more year. But I'm not really high on the probability of that happening because Florida is a little bit, I think they are a little bit impatient now. And I do think that there are a lot of top coaches that they could go out and get. A lot of people have been screaming Chris Kleiman, Lance Leopold, and those guys have been committed to those programs, but you're only committed until the money is good enough. And there was a rumor that even Mike Gundy was, had a little bit of interest in this job a few years ago, but people feel like that's more of a leverage move. But I definitely think they get rid of Billy, they could definitely get an upgrade. So maybe it depends on, if they test the waters out there and see if they know they can get a top guy. Because if they fire Billy Napier, I think it's going to be because they already know who the next guy is going to be. If the season, is somewhat, a little bit in between with a few close losses and whatnot. But if it's just a complete disaster, maybe he doesn't even make it through the season.
Yeah. Oh, I totally see that. And I think that, for example, if they go bowling, if they go 6-6 with this schedule, I do think he, deserves to keep his job, even though many would find that to be frustrating. Thank you,
If he
Chris.
goes
Again.
6-6, he should win Coach of the Year.
Yeah, he should certainly be a candidate for that. Thank you, Chris, again for the $2 super chat that reads, "Breathe, Scott. Nebraska will be okay." He was referring to someone else in the chat, but I kind of also get that feeling with like Scott Frost, like just calm down, because no, never mind. Scott Frost was almost too calm for his own good at Nebraska. I never saw him exhibit any emotion, with the exception of his final game when they lost to Clay Helton, which was just hilarious. And he looked like he knew he was gonna get fired the following morning. It's like, oh yeah, you're done. Okay, last thing that I want to discuss before we close out, only because honestly I'd stay up talking forever, but I have work tomorrow and I have to be up at 5 a.m. so I got to go to bed fairly soon. What I want to discuss is some games, some good non-conference games. And where's a better place to start than the great state of Florida? Actually, no. That wasn't the order that I thought it was going to be in. But it's okay. Clemson versus Georgia. It's a neutral site, and I think the kickoff is noon Eastern Standard Time. And the game is being played in Atlanta. It's neutral site, but it's being played in Atlanta, essentially in Georgia's backyard. The early spread is Georgia -13. What do you think about this game?
Man, for everybody that thinks that Clemson's about to make their big return to the national scene, this is the test. This is it. Because if they can't find a way to win this game, I don't really see them winning the ACC this year, because Miami's going to be a good team. This isn't me being overly optimistic like always. Like, this is Miami's best team that they put on paper in a very long time. And year 3 is when Mario Cristobal normally gets it together. You got Cam Ward. Clemson, even if they lose to Georgia by like 3 points, it still is a game that is going to show us a lot, because people still view Clemson as one of those programs that, they're prestigious, they're a national championship contender, because every year, people always have them as a lock to make it to the playoffs. Like, even last year, people was like, Clemson's going to get back, and they didn't get back. They didn't even make it to the ACC. Did they make it to the ACC championship game? No, like Louisville made it. So this is going to be the game that I'm circling on the calendar to say, okay, like, this is going to be the indicator that Clemson is that team that a lot of us thought they are. You feel me? Georgia, they definitely do have a significant talent advantage over them. But I think that Clemson offensively, this is going to be the best that they've been in the last 3 years. They got a lot of talent at wide receiver. You're going to have a true freshman in TJ Moore and Bryant Westcott Jr., who you're probably going to hear their names called a lot. They got a veteran receiver room. You got Antonio Williams, Troy Stiletto, who should be pretty good. The running back room is pretty good, too. I think their offensive line could be pretty solid. But it really depends on how well Cade Klubnik plays. And if you watch Cade Klubnik over the last couple of years, like, he's not that good. He's barely able to complete over 50% of his passes in top 25 games. He's like a slightly better version of DJ Uiagalelei, and you're really going to need him to take that next step this season if Clemson wants to go far and beat Georgia too, because Georgia's going to have great quarterback play. I think Clemson's defense could keep them around because I do think defensively they are going to be really good, and they do got Garrett Riley, who I have a lot of respect for, but I don't know. I know Georgia's going to win, but I don't know if they cover per se, because I definitely could see Clemson sticking around.
Yeah, I get that. 13 is a big number when both of these teams return a solid enough of an amount to improve at various levels. And the last time these two teams played, in 2021, Georgia ended the year as the vastly superior team, and it was a 10-3 defensive bludgeoning, like with a total of 13 points, which is insane. I totally lean Georgia post spring. I think Georgia is better at probably every position except for maybe defensive tackle. Like, I think Georgia has the better ends, the better linebackers, the better DBs, and offense isn't even a question. Their O-line's one of the best in the country. Clemson's weakness under Sweeney has been the O-line on offense, and it's even weaker now. I mean, they bring in Matt Luke, who I think will help improve the trench play there on the offensive side of the ball, but they're not using the portal, and I think they returned most of their O-line, but they've lost some depth pieces, and I think they did lose one starter, so it's not like they're bringing everyone back there. And like you said, Cade Klubnik has a lot of questions. In fact, statistically, he's worse than DJ Uiagalelei, which is pretty bad. They lose Will Shipley. He's gone. Phil Maffa's good, but it would be very helpful for them to have another back to go with them. We don't know who that'll be.
Jay Haynes is really they're good at running back. Like they got some backs for sure.
Okay, I'll pay attention to that. Even saying that, DJ Moore and Bryant Westcott, they'll be good based off of what I've seen and what I've heard, and the fact that they're 5 stars in high school, highly recruited guys. At least one of them's going to be good based off of how 5 stars typically turn out. But they are true freshmen, so Clemson just has so many questions. They are old. They are stiff. I mean, I think Dabo Swinney's absolutely intentionally drowning the program. And Kirby Smart, while he's not buying his roster, in my opinion, like he's using the portal supplementally, he's recruiting the best in the country. He's developed at one of the highest levels in the country. His program right now is the best in college football. And in terms of wins, losses, and achievements, it's been the best program since the COVID year. By, the only other program who can compete with them on that level is the only one who's won a national title besides them, which is Michigan. And even then, Georgia beat Michigan head-to-head, and they've won 2 natties. Michigan's only won a natty. And Michigan's lost most of their staff and roster. Georgia returns most of their staff and roster. I think it's pretty clear that Georgia's the number 1 program, and I don't even know if Clemson's top 10, factoring in resources, their coach, their roster, and what they're doing with that. They're not just being inefficient on one front. It seems like they're being inefficient on multiple fronts. So I agree with you that I'm fairly confident Georgia's going to win, even though part of me does feel like if Dabo is to bring this program back it probably is going to be this game because this is a big game. And it's not like Clemson has turned into a terrible team. It's more like they've turned into an inconsistent team. They were able to beat Notre Dame last year, and they were able to compete with Florida State. They were in 2022, again, I mean, they lost to Tennessee. They got blown out by Notre Dame, but they had some flashes at points. And in 2021, they competed with Georgia. So I don't exactly know, of course, and no one does. We'll have to wait until the season starts. But I agree with a lot of what you said, except the only thing I'd change is I'm inclined right now to pick Georgia to cover that 13-point spread. This game, I think you'll be fascinated with. And it's one that I'm actually fascinated with, too, because I think this is going to be the anti-game management bowl, where both coaches are trying their best to lose. This is Miami at Florida, of course. Miami, an early 3.5-point favorite. I personally lean Miami for, I think, a plethora of reasons larger than why I would pick Georgia to beat Clemson, but I want to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'm still taking Miami. Initially, I was convinced Miami was going to win by at least 14 points, but with what Florida is bringing in from the portal and me doing a little bit more due diligence, it's going to be a tough game. You're going on the road, playing in the swamp, week one. And playing in the swamp is tough for several reasons. It's loud as hell. And plus, just the humidity, especially in Gainesville, because you've never been to Gainesville, but I recently went to Gainesville a few months ago. It's country. When they call it the swamp, it kind of does feel like the swamp. And being in Florida, it just feels a little bit more muggy there than anywhere else in Florida, which gives them a huge home field advantage, especially this early into the season, because this is the hottest that it's going to be. Miami, though, they just have such a big advantage when it comes to quarterback. Graham Mertz isn't bad. You feel me? This dude is above average QB. You feel me? He's really good. The problem is that Cam Ward is a superstar. And people think that this game can be close because Cam Ward has to learn new teammates, a new system, but he's played in an air raid system everywhere he's been, from Incarnate World, FCS, to air raid offense, following his head coach from Incarnate World to Washington State. And now with Shannon Dawson running an air raid system too, you know, he's pretty much in the same offense, all three schools that he's played at. And then you get Damian Martinez. Miami just has so much of a better team. But where Miami's weakness does lie is the secondary. There is some concerns there. And Graham Mercer is a good enough quarterback, and with how deep they are at receiver, they definitely could exploit that. But I do think that, you know, Miami's offensive line should be able to get the better of Florida's defensive line. I don't really see too much gradual improvement there outside of getting Joey Slackman out of the transfer portal, and their linebacking core still is a little bit questionable. So I expect Miami to win this game by at least a touchdown. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. It's going to be a competitive game. It's going to be a back and forth matchup, but Miami really is a good team this year. Like, I already got money on them winning the ACC.
Oh, look, if Miami is going to start a run where they win the ACC, it starts here, because they have a very easy schedule. Miami does. But this is one of those games where you circle in the preseason, and this is a test. This is a week one test. Cam Ward, it's interesting because he actually was less efficient than Mertz in QBR, but I think with a better supporting cast, and like you said, same overall scheme, of course with differences, but same overall scheme. You got Xavier Restrepo, Sam Brown from Houston at wide receiver, an O-line that is being developed by Alex Mirabal and Mario Cristobal. I give them similar benefit of the doubt to Michigan, for example, with offensive line development, or what you would used to give Iowa, or what I would even give Oregon right now, and Georgia for sure. Like, Mirabal's a really good O-line coach, so even though they lose players there, they'll be set. Damian Martinez transferring in, that's huge. I mean, this could be one of the best offenses in college football. The question is Mario Cristobal's game management and the defense. But even with the defense, they brought in Simeon Barrow, who's a player from the Big Ten that I really, really liked. I mean, when healthy, he's one of the better D tackles in the country. They bring him in. They did bring in some defensive depth at other places. And I just got a feeling that they have a trench advantage over Florida. They have a quarterback with a higher ceiling than Florida. They have, I think, certainly a better receiver room. And in terms of game management, Cristobal's awful. But Billy Napier's not. I mean, this isn't like we're not talking Mario Cristobal going up against, let's say, Kirby Smart or Nick Saban or even Kalen DeBoer, who I think is probably one of the best, if not the best schemers in the country. Or he's not even going up against Steve Sarkisian, who has had some bad game management games, but also has had some impressive ones, like beating Alabama. Or even Josh Heupel. Like, Billy Napier's toward the bottom of the barrel in the SEC in game management and efficiency. 3.5 point spread. Would you take Miami to cover confidently?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Positively. The thing with Mario Cristobal that separates him from Billy Napier is that he's not afraid to make changes. You know, he looks at himself in the mirror. He knows it's not working. He changes it. It was a narrative that, you know, his offense was too old school. And people still think that Cam Ward isn't going to get developed properly because they're stuck in, you know, 2019 or, you know, what he did with Justin Herbert. But he has a way new different offensive system now. You got Shannon Dawson, who's an air raid guy, spread 4-3 wide receiver sets. And that's really different from what Mario Cristobal has been accustomed to running in the past. So that shows you that he's not afraid to make changes there when it comes to his offensive philosophy. And that Georgia Tech loss was a really big turning point for Mario Cristobal as a coach. Like, after that mishap, he apologized to the players in the locker room. Like, took accountability, said, you know, like, my fault. Like, I let you guys down. You feel me? I have to be better. Yeah. And it's just one of those moments of growth that you need as a head coach that we haven't seen out of Billy Napier, apparently, because this fool's still calling the plays.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah, I think Mario Cristobal is a lot like James Franklin. Like, they'll forever have issues with game management, but they're not stiff enough to be terrible coaches, because Franklin's made routine changes at Penn State. The problem is just particularly in big games. Although I think Cristobal, it's more even. Like, it's small teams, maybe big teams as well. We'll just have to see. I certainly would agree with you, though, that I think Miami's going to cover this game. I don't think it'll be a blowout by any means, but it's easier for me to see Miami winning by a touchdown, maybe 10 points, or something along those lines. Next up, this is a night game in week 1. A Notre Dame at Texas A&M. The spread, by the way, is even. No one's favored in this game. And this is with Notre Dame being viewed unanimously as a top 10 team. And A&M, by most people, I think is either borderline top 25 or not ranked. What's your reaction to that? That spread?
This is a big game for both of these coaches. You got Marcus Freeman, where Notre Dame fans expect to be a playoff team this year. And they've given him a lot of leeway because of how good he's been recruiting. But if I'm not mistaken, last year, though, you know, Mike Elko and Duke played Notre Dame pretty tough.
Yes.
Now, that game was at home, but I kind of lean Texas A&M because I still think that they have a better roster. And they are playing at home. So I'll go ahead and favor Texas A&M to win that one. I'm a little bit conflicted because it's like, you know, it could go either way, but They got the quarterback advantage. Connor Wigman is way better than Riley Leonard. Riley Leonard is like a Daniel Jones 2.0, really mobile. He's a decent passer, but I still don't think Notre Dame has that guy at quarterback.
Hmm.
Like they had Cam Ward at QB. Oh yeah, I love their chances. Like they always get these quarterbacks that are good but not great. Sam Hartman, good but not great. And that's kind of what I see here. They are going to be a really good team up front. And it definitely could be a playoff team. They do return a lot of talent on defense. Like they could have one of the better defenses in college football this year. But I like Texas A&M to get the win. They're playing at home. They got the talent advantage still. And I like Mike Elko more as a head coach than I do Marcus Freeman. And Marcus Freeman has had some really big mishaps too. And he lost the game to the upset master, Jeff Brom, a guy who you're really familiar with. So it's just in big games. It's kind of hit or miss with Marcus Freeman. With Mike Elko, I trust him a lot more, especially when they splattered Duke week one or they splattered Clemson week one last year. Like, I'll never forget that. In terms of guys who always has his team ready to play, Mike Elko is one of the best coaches in preparation, and he has all off season to prepare for this matchup. So I would favor Texas A&M.
Yeah, I understand why this spread is even, especially because I personally think these two teams are much more similar than most would rank them. I have A&M in my top 20, and while I have Notre Dame in my top 10, I do not have them top 5 or top 6, and I will not have them top 5, top 6.
If Notre Dame was playing this game at home, I would take Notre Dame.
Same here.
It's just so hard to win on the road. I'll favor the home team, especially with the spread being what it is. I probably won't even touch this game.
Yeah.
A game that I would love, a game that I feel confident in outside the Miami game is probably Colorado splattering North Dakota State. And that's another big week one matchup that everybody's going to have their eyes on because you already know the reputation that North Dakota State has, even though they aren't what they used to be, but it's still North Dakota State. They're a 7.5-point dog too. And this is going to be one of those tests for Dion. It's like, you feel me? You done brought all these guys in, and your Dion expects to win the conference this year and be a playoff team. Like he's gone all in on this year. Like when he got to Colorado, his goal was never to win right away. Of course, he wanted to if that came along with it, but they were always aiming for 2024 being this year because this is the last year that he'll ever have the opportunity to coach his boys again. Shiloh graduates and Shadur is going to declare for the draft. And after that, that's it. And he's not going to coach in the NFL. So he really wants to win this season. And he's gone all in on that. So that North Dakota State game, that's going to be a game that a lot of people are going to be watching. It actually has a primetime spot too.
That's funny.
So that's a big, believe it or not, like any game that Deion Sanders is coaching in, like everybody's going to make a big deal. Then after that, I believe they play Nebraska.
Yeah, Nebraska, Colorado, and also Wisconsin, Alabama were some other games that I considered talking about on here, but I just wanted to stick with these 5. Coming back to Notre Dame at A&M, I'm, for now, just because of Howard Cross and Xavier Watts and Benjamin Morrison returning on that defense and their reputation on the O-line. We were talking about Miami and how I trust them with O-line no matter what they lose. It's similar with Notre Dame because of Joe Rudolph, their O-line coach. He's really good. And they brought in Mike Denbrock as the OC, and I'm not extremely high on Marcus Freeman, but I do have more of a sense of optimism with him than pessimism, especially given the fact that he was an elite coordinator who really helped keep teams elite or bring them to an elite performance on his side of the ball, the defense. I think Elko's a better head coach right now, but I'd honestly give, I don't know. It's so difficult. I'd give a roster edge to Notre Dame. I think that Texas A&M still is a pretty good roster. They have Shamar Stewart on the D-line. Their O-line is questions, though. Receiver, tight end, running back, quarterback, especially Connor Weigman, I like. But I think that Notre Dame has a trench advantage, and new head coach, new transfers. It'll be a game, though. I'd lean Notre Dame, but I understand completely why you lean A&M. Second to last one that we're going to be doing. This one is USC versus LSU. Sunday night.
This is the game I cannot wait
This one
to
I'm
watch.
going to be live streaming. I'm probably going to be like live reacting to this as it happens. It's going to be incredible. Two teams that last year had pedestrian defenses. LSU had an offense that, if they had a better defense, it probably would have put up similar numbers to that 2019 offense. And USC, if they had better trench play, could have also had a generational offense too. The early spread, LSU -7. This is neutral site in Las Vegas too, so it is closer to USC, but we all know that LSU probably has a much more dedicated fan base than USC does. What's your little preview of this game?
Both of these programs are in really similar spots. You got overhauled coaching staffs with big name defensive coordinators that both programs and head coaches are banking on having immediate impacts, despite not having the talent that they would like to have on that side of the football. USC has concerns about the interior of their defensive line. Well, guess what? So does LSU. They have the exact same problem. You got a few talented players there, but the difference is that, at least with USC, you got Bear Alexander. LSU doesn't have a Bear Alexander. And, you get in Bo Davis, who's probably the best defensive line coach in America, but you're really banking on the addition of him and Blake Baker to really improve that defense overnight. Same thing that Lincoln Riley is doing with DeAnton Lynn.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a really good battle to see who really shows up first. And plus, I think Brian Kelly is the most overrated coach in college football.
Really?
I don't think he's going to be able to win a natty at LSU. A lot of complaining for me. And the dude just never really is able to win these kinds of big matchups. They lost to Florida State back-to-back years in their week one opening matchups. Lincoln Riley has experience winning big games. This dude won multiple conference championships. He's been to the college football playoffs. And the reason why these two programs are exactly similar is that they're pretty much a mirror of each other, Sam. Like, if LSU and USC were to wake up and look at themselves in the mirror, they will see each other. Or it'll be like that Spider-Man meme, you.
Yeah.
Because you know that the offenses are going to be potent. They got Kyron Lacey for LSU does, one of the better wide receivers coming back. USC has Zachariah Branch, who is incredibly underrated right now. You talk about somebody who I would bet money on, non-QB, to win the Heisman. I got my money on him. But they got the same concerns on defense. But USC, surprisingly to me, I lean them to win this game because their secondary is better than LSU. LSU is still trying to get their secondary right. They tried to overhaul it in the portal last year. It didn't work. They barely used the portal at all. And Brian Kelly was really hurt that he didn't get Dominic Williams. There's a reason why he went on that rant. So I really like USC to win this game. LSU does have a better offense just because they're better on the offensive line. And Gunnar Nussmeier is really good, but so is Miller Moss. So both of these teams are evenly matched. They're exactly in the same situation. But I lean USC just because I trust Lincoln Riley more and this kind of big game atmosphere than I do Brian Kelly. And if Brian Kelly loses this game, people are more people going to start looking at him with a bad eye, because remember last year people thought LSU was going to win the SEC West, and they lost to FSU. So
and then they lost in a shootout to Ole Miss, and then when Jaden Daniels went down against Alabama, game immediately. Yeah, I'm almost shocked it's this big, but I get it, because I think LSU has more depth and more talent than USC does. USC got more bodies in the portal, but they on average they got similar quality players, and LSU has recruited much better than USC has. And LSU even last year was a much better team than USC was. And the year prior before that in 2022 they were, I'd say, pretty similar, maybe USC being a little better. I think both of these teams, LSU I think especially, is overrated entering this year. And the more I look at it, see, at USC, I came in originally thinking, oh, this team's going to enter the Big Ten, and everyone is going to just punch on them, walk on them, knee on them, and just destroy them. And then the spring game happened, and I'm thinking, okay, the defense looks like a little better because they were getting the better of the offense. But then I'm doing more research on the portal and just looking at other teams. Their O-line and D-line have no one that I care about. They
Except
don't.
Bear Alexander.
I mean, there's Bear Alexander. I only care about him as a pass rusher. I don't think his specialty's pass rush. It's not stopping the run. LSU, I think they have more pieces in the trenches, but they have questions at interior defense. They do, and I'm not giving them benefit of the doubt there in year one, even with Bo Davis. I mean, he's awesome, but with how much they lost there, you have to think that it'll take time. I think that both defenses are not going to immediately rebound. I think they'll both improve defensively, but they won't be good. They'll just be average, maybe above average at best, or bad at worst, but not as bad. Offensively, what gives USC an advantage, I think, is they have, going from Caleb Williams to Miller Moss is easier than going from Jaden Daniels to Garrett Nussmeier. In my opinion, because Daniels, no, I'm serious. Daniels was like the SEC's best rusher on top of being their best passer. Nussmeier's a total pro-style QB. Caleb Williams could run, and he was athletic, and he was good. But you have more of a reputational pedigree with Riley developing quarterbacks, so it's easier to give benefit of the doubt to Moss's passing ability. And Williams was not Daniels in terms of scrambling. So I think it'll be easier on USC, still being hard, but it'll be easier on them than it will be on LSU in their QB transition. And I love USC's receivers with Deuce Robinson, Zachariah Branch. I don't know. I originally had USC winning this game, and I still lean them to, but I'm going to go even now because there's I think plenty of reasons to pick both. I don't think this is like Georgia, Clemson, or even Miami, Florida.
You know what you should do?
What?
Take the points, take the over.
Yes.
This definitely could be a shootout. And the thing with Garrett Nussmeier real quick is like, we've seen Garrett Nussmeier enough to know that it really shouldn't be that big of a transition because the offensive line that LSU has should be top 10. I believe like either the left tackle or right tackle is an All-American. Like they got a stout offensive line. And we saw Garrett Nussmeier in the SEC championship and Brian Kelly's first year absolutely just go scorched earth on Georgia's defense. And this is when they had their starters in. So, and he looked pretty good in their bowl game too. So it's like, I think they'll be straight with Garrett Nussmeier. Like, I think the transition between him and Jaden Daniels, like they kind of already have seen that in place. And even when he's coming to replace Jaden Daniels, when he got banged up, like he's been pretty decent. My thing is like with USC, I think that they have some players on defense that have a little bit more upside. LSU has Harold Perkins. That's about it. With USC, outside of Bear Alexander, like you do have Jamil Muhammad, who started the season out last year pretty good, but then he fell off in the second half. Nate Clifton has upside. Same thing with Anthony Lucas. You just wonder if those guys can hit that upside, but their secondary just washes LSU out of the water, bro. Like I think their secondary should be like the strength of their defense. I lean LSU to win this game. I feel really not LSU, USC to win this game, and I feel really confident betting against Brian Kelly in this spot.
That's fair. I think especially with the secondary, I do have more confidence in USC than LSU. And last but certainly not least, this is a week 2 matchup. This is Texas at Michigan. The early spread is Texas by 3.5. And per S&P Plus, I think in the winter Michigan was favored by a point. Now it's like basically a push by S&P Plus, which is the closest thing we have to um, a power ranking right now that predicts games, as most others are, still gathering data. FPI hasn't even been released yet. It's normally released in April, but I think due to the portal window and all the different changes, they wanted to make changes to FPI. What's your take on this game?
Man, I got Texas winning this thing by at least 10 points, bro. I get that they're playing on the road in Michigan, but Texas got a squad this year. They're the second best team in the SEC. They're up there with Georgia. I think they're just as talented with how potent their offense is going to be. And I get that they did lose some really good defensive tackles, but it's like this is Texas. Like they just reload. They don't really got to rebuild. Like they bought this team. And they also got some really good cornerbacks out of the transfer portal. They got Andrew Mabuka, who's a really good safety. He transferred from Clemson. This is one of those players I was talking about that they bought. And they also got Trey Moore, who's a productive pass rusher. So the guys they get in the portal, they're not unproven guys. You feel me? These are guys that were starters elsewhere, and they just left because they wanted to get paid, and Texas went and got them. Like, I really feel like with Michigan's quarterback situation, you know that you're going to get competent play out of Quinn Ewers. I know that, he's a little overrated, but he led them to a win on the road against Tuscaloosa, and they still return majority of that team. And this is probably the best offensive line outside of Georgia and the SEC. Like, you got Kelvin Banks Jr., who's going to be probably a top 10, top 15 pick and next year's draft. Like, and the majority of the offensive line that they have was part of that 2022 recruiting class that was one of the best, that was the best in college football in terms of the offensive line. And I think they got 4 out of 5 starters coming back on that unit, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that Michigan, this is going to be the game that we see how good Alex Orji truly is. You feel me? Because to beat a team like Texas, Oregon, Ohio State, you're going to need good quarterback play out of him. So I would lean Texas to win, but I think they should win by at least 10. I think they close for the first 3 quarters. They pull away in the 4th quarter. You get a big mistake out of Alex Orji, and they roll with it. Similar to that Bama game. That Bama game was pretty fault, but then eventually Texas started to pull away. They started to body blow them, and I think that could happen also. Like, Texas is just so good that I don't see Michigan just grounding and pounding them to the ground. Like, Texas just has too much talent for that to happen. I'm not saying that Michigan won't have Devin Edwards. I'm just saying I'm not expecting them to have like a 250-yard performance or something like that. They really got to be bad against Texas. Like, Texas, they won it all this year. It probably should be Georgia, Texas, and then you got the other teams in there. Like, they're up there, bro. Like, their roster is really good.
Yeah.
And then you got Steve Sarkisian, too. He got the coaching advantage. This is a really big game for Sharon Moore. I know he had the 3 big games and replaced Jim Harbaugh, but Steve Sarkisian, this man just went to the college football playoffs. He was a few seconds away and, a play away from maybe stealing the win from Kalen DeBoer.
Yeah. This certainly presents a challenge to Michigan, and I understand why Texas is favored by 3.5. Really what that point spread tells you is that Texas would be picked to beat Michigan by double digits on a neutral site, because the Big House is like one of the more intimidating home fields, so they would get even more points toward them for playing at home. Michigan would. I have the opposite take, and it's one that's mostly based off of matchups. I think that Michigan will win, and I'll even say, even if Texas is the better team, I like Michigan's run game and their O-line, which they lose a lot in the O-line, but a lot of these players that are going to be starting for Michigan will be seniors and juniors who've been developed by Sharon Moore, and they've been conditioned very well. And they have Miles Hinton and Giovanni El-Hadi coming back, who've had some playing time, who've had some starts or contributions. Donovan Edwards, Kalel Mullings, and then Orji being a runner. If Sweat and Murphy came back, I'd have a very hard time picking Michigan because those were all-American defensive tackles, and they defended the run extremely well. Their weakness was the secondary, but again, we don't know if Michigan, how well they'll be able to pass. But what I do know, or that I'm very confident in, is Michigan is going to have at least a good ground game, and they could have an elite ground game. Is Jermaine Lole, Bill Norton, and Taioli Sevilla, I hope I didn't butcher any of those names, but I probably did, are they going to be as good as Sweat and Murphy on the interior? Maybe, but I don't think so. And that secondary still has questions. I think Texas also lost their best linebacker to the NFL draft, like a really good linebacker. They have questions on defense. And their offense, while it will be one of the better offenses in the country, they're going up against, I think, one of the better D-lines in the country. And a secondary that has one of the best cover guys in Will Johnson. And it's in the Big House. If this was in Darrell Royal Stadium, if it was there, I'd probably lean Texas. I'd probably be forced to because it's road game. It's in the South, warm weather, and Texas would that stadium would be that would be Texas's biggest home game since Alabama in 2022, and they played Alabama down to the wire. With Bryce Young and Jahmyr Gibbs and a defense that featured Will Anderson and other great players. But I think there's so many matchup advantages that could go Michigan's way or do go Michigan's way that for Texas to win, most of the matchup advantages have to flip Texas's way. And there's a chance that happens. I just don't think it does. I think that they'll need either Michigan's O-line to not be good, maybe just above average or good, their D-line to completely reload from last year on the interior, or their offense to be so good that they can torch a defense that's projected to be top 4 in the country by everyone, including analytics. But that is just my opinion, and this is a big test for both teams. Both teams went to the playoff last year. Both teams, Michigan has a new staff, mostly new roster, and Texas is entering a new conference, for crying out loud. So this game is, I think, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, non-conference game to pay attention to.
My question is, how does Michigan have so many matchup advantages, though, when they lose so much, at least defensively over Texas, where Texas has a top 10 offensive line that is unanimously ranked top 10 by majority of people, and they have a top 10 offensive tackle on Kelvin Banks. They return 4 out of 5 starters. It's like Michigan's D-line is good, too, but it's like, I don't think that Michigan is going to train wreck Texas, because Texas is a school that does recruit 4 or 5 star athletes, and they've already been an SEC team even when they were in the Big 12. They just, prior to Steve Sarkisian, didn't have the coaching. I feel like there's way more matchups in this game that favor Texas than it does Michigan, but Michigan does have the home field advantage, which gives them that. But offensively, with everything that they have at receiver, and you losing Mike Sanders you still got Will Johnson. You do got some talent back there and some guys that have been really developed, but so does Texas. And plus, Texas has some guys the dude that they got from Clemson, Andrew Mabuka, that, he's already proven to be one of the best players in the nation. I kind of feel like you a little bit underestimating Texas just a tad bit, not even a tad bit. Like Texas really is a good team, like, and they already beaten Alabama on the road and Tuscaloosa. A lot of these players already done played in that game. Like most of their offensive line, Quinn Ewers with the experience. Like it's hard to be the Texas team when you have so much of an unproven commodity at quarterback that Alex Orji is,
Yeah.
especially when you saw how Alabama struggled with Jalen Milroe. And this is really early into the season, too. Like, if you had Alex Orji, you would rather him play Texas late in the season than to play early in the season because at least he'll have the ability to gain more confidence or have a little bit more experience. And this is a really tough test for Michigan. Like, I think that this game kind of does favor Texas more than you may give them a little bit credit for. But I understand where you coming from. Like Michigan does do a really good job of developing, but at the same time, like so has Texas. And Texas, it's like even though they lose some two talented defensive tackles to the league, it's like all of these guys that they have replaced them outside of the guys from the transfer portal or 4 stars or better.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And Texas returns more in production. They're going to be the more experienced team, and they might have more team chemistry. The only reason I think Michigan is more
But
matchup
it is the big
advantages.
house, though. I feel you.
Yeah. The only reason I think Michigan is more matchup advantages is just because where they lose their talent. If Michigan brought back their entire secondary, like even Mikey Sainer still and Rod Moore's healthy, but they lose their entire two deep on the D line, like let's say Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant are older. Well, then Texas, I'd probably pick Texas to game control them because Texas is a really good run game. Or on offense, if Michigan returned, well, offense is more tricky just because of, well, I don't know. Like if Michigan lost Edwards to the draft, I'd have questions. Or if it's just trench plays Michigan's specialty, Texas is probably like last year the reason they were so successful was because of their trench play. Like yes, the receivers and quarterback helped, but defensively their perimeter play and secondary just wasn't good. And especially with Texas losing what they did on D tackle, it's just like where the teams returned production and departed production, I feel like outside of Michigan returning McCarthy, it couldn't have gone better for Michigan to match up in this game. But it just
I
is
got
what
a
it is.
question.
Yeah.
If Michigan wins this game, you're going to have to rely on Alex Orji to throw the football with a good level of efficiency. Like you're not going to be able to ground and pound Texas. Like I get they lose so much, but for them to really lose this game to ground and pound, you got to go for 200 plus on them. And no matter how much they lose, like they still do have a lot of seniors replacing these guys. Like at best, I can see you going for 150 a pop, but you still gonna need Alex Orji to make some big throws downfield.
Yeah.
And I don't really think that Michigan just based off. I don't really think if this game has to go in direction where they got to throw the ball to win, it doesn't lean their way. But if they can play their brand of football, and them losing 2 All-Americans definitely does hurt, and they are at home. So I definitely could see this game leading their way. I just feel like Texas, though, like you feel me? I get what you're saying. Like you make some good points, but I just feel like Texas, they're a really good team, and I think Michigan has way more to prove than what Texas does in this
Yeah.
game. But that's it. That's all I got to say.
I have a hard time. It could happen just because of some of my questions about Ewers and how good I think Michigan's defense and run game will be. But I'd be inclined to say they probably can't do to Texas what Michigan's done to Penn State the past 2 years, where you just run, 40 minutes of TOP, game over. Like you'll have to have either more quarterback runs to make it a really diverse running threat, or you'll have to have more likely what you said, where you have some play actions or some clutch passes to keep Texas's defense honest, to keep them from just stacking the box every play and maybe putting enough of their good secondary players like Makuba back in coverage. That's all I have to talk about here. That's all we have to say in this video. I don't think we should do Q&As today just because we've talked for 2 hours and I frankly have to go to bed. Like, crazy as it sounds, it's true. I'm not even going to get 8 hours of sleep now because we've streamed past 9. It's okay though. I can still get 7.5. But thank you very much, JT, for coming on. Always a pleasure.
I appreciate you for having me on, man. It's always a great time talking college ball with you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know who we'll have on as a guest next week, but I'll try and get someone on. If I can't get in contact with someone by the weekend, I might just go at it alone, guys, but prep like several days in advance because I do have some ideas. Or maybe I'll take another week hiatus, but we'll be back in 2. Who knows? But I'll make sure to let you guys know. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys all very soon.